We have the first Prime Minister and only living national hero, Sir Kennedy Simmonds. Dr. Simmonds, thank you for being here with us. It is truly an honor to have you here, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure. I haven't known of the studio before, so it's been an interesting experience for me. Okay. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure, sir. So I do want to begin by looking a little bit at your early life. Obviously, we know that you've ascended to greatness. I want to know if there were any indications from your beginnings on Rosemary Lane as to the heights that you would ascend to.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay.
You could imagine a young fellow in Rosemary Lane playing football with the breadfruit and the makeshift bat, a kerosene pan would be the stumps, would be the wicket. Right? But the last thing that would have occurred to me that was having that kind of responsibility. Mm-hmm. Then those days it was work, lessons, because that was essential, lessons first before you could go to play. Mm-hmm. And then play. Right? That life was centered around that.
At some point, it became very serious for you, but we'll get to that soon enough.
Okay, so you said you had no idea, but what was the turning point in your life that made you, well, let me switch up this question. You eventually ended up in medicine.
Yeah.
So once you were finished with school, you realized you wanted to be in medicine, right?
Yes, medicine was my first choice.
Okay.
Well, in fact, let me put it this way. At that time, medicine was my only choice.
Okay.
Simply put, I always wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
In St. Kitts.
Okay.
Not just a doctor. Not a doctor anywhere. A
In
doctor
St.
in St. Kitts. So that was my whole thinking and mindset. Okay. And I'll tell you, almost anything you can ask me this morning can be found by your viewers and others on this book, The Making of a National Hero, which is my autobiography.
Lovely, lovely.
So medicine was my choice.
Okay.
But I was when I left school, I majored, we'll use the term majored now, but chemistry was my best subject.
Okay.
When I left school, I went to work at the Sugar Association Research Laboratory as senior bench chemist. And that laboratory is located exactly where the school feeding program is located on of Nevis on Wellington Road. And so my first working salary after school was $100 a month.
That's a lot back then.
Yeah, and let's put it in perspective. At that point, I became the highest wage earner in my house.
Rich guy.
Right. And also, I think something which may be a little unusual and different for young people growing up these days. Okay. When I went to work, and I came back first, and my aunt, I grew up with my aunt and grandmother. My aunt gave me key for the house. And that was a sign. I start to work, I get a key for the house. Before that, you rent out and with permission, and you'd come and you'd call or knock and they would open for you.
Okay.
Right. Only in certain special circumstances they might lend you a key if you were going to a function, a debating society meeting or a function which you expected to be late, a school play or something like that. You have a key, which you gave back on arrival. So that was the sort of circumstances in which I grew up.
But how did you manage to transition, though, from medicine into politics?
I don't know if it just happened. And I didn't really have a thought about it.
Okay.
Right? It centered around, when I returned in 1960, I interned in 1963 at Kingston Public Hospital in Jamaica. Returned in December 1963 and went to work at Cunningham Hospital almost immediately. Right? Eventually, we worked out contract terms and so on. I didn't want to become a civil servant then because I was thinking in terms of working for a while, getting a little money, and then going on and do something, and then coming back and settling. So that was the initial thought, the initial approach. No sooner had I started to work that they sent me off to Anguilla.
Okay.
The doctor there, a man by the name of Dr. Haas, he was then 70-something years old. He hadn't had a break because they didn't have staff to replace him.
Okay.
And so he went off on vacation, right? Accumulated vacation. And they sent me down here, green, fresh, just out of internship. They called me then, when they saw me in Angola, they called me the little boy doctor. And I was like a curiosity. So the people actually flocked to the first couple of clinics to see this little boy doctor. I don't know if I should tell you about an incident surrounding that business of people flocking just to see. But if you want to, I'll tell you.
Dr. Simmonds, as the first Prime Minister of our Federation and the only living national hero, how do you feel about the progression of our nation thus far?
Well, you're tempting me to give a long speech now. I think we've come a long way.
Okay.
Tremendously long way. And it's been a steady progression against unbelievable odds in the sense that by the time I actually got into government, not just into politics, into government, the sugar industry was for all intents and purposes dead.
Yes.
We sort of kept it going because there were so many people dependent upon it and so on. But it was virtually dead. Well, after we left office, very shortly afterwards, the last rights were proclaimed upon it. But eventually, of course, we came back into office. And the thing is, it was essential that we just find something else, another way. Right? Well, I think everybody knows now that the Citizenship by Investment Program is the breadbasket of this country. So that we got into that. We started that during my first term in office.
All right, sir.
Yeah.
And well, obviously that's how we've progressed, correct,
Yes.
Potential? All right, sir. I want to focus a little bit on well, there are two things, obviously, because you alluded to one before, but particularly the autobiography. So in 2019, you published that. What would you say is one of the most important lessons that went into that book?
There are few lessons that center basically about the same theme. All right. As I indicate, this book basically I tried to present me as I am, right? No polish, no anything. Just what you see, what you read about is what you get. And my first early influence, if you just run through them quickly, I went to school, infant school we will call it, preschool. Lady named Miss Matthew up Market Street, just opposite the Salvation Army. On the west side, there's the first alley on the left. And she kept the school in her house. And so there was a small school, but it was basically an infant school. And that was the first things. Reading, writing, arithmetic, the basics. But you got to be there on time. Right? Then you have to be to do your work and diligently, and she'd be walking around. She gave you something to do. See that you're focused on that. Work time was work time, playtime was playtime. But that sort of thing was really reinforced when I went to Bastille Boys School and came under the tutelage of a gentleman by the name of Mr. Beach. I'm sure you might have heard of him. And if you haven't heard of him, you will be able to read about him there, because a very prominent judge, late Franklin Adams, gave a eulogy at his funeral, and that I deliberately included that in my book. I mean, this man had a tremendous early effect on my life. When you went to school, you had to be on time. And he used to tell us that he's preparing us for work. In those days, the highest you could expect was 7 standard certificate. A few people went to grammar school. The year that I went, the government offered 3 scholarships. And one was won by Desmond Otley in Sandy Point, another by Joseph Archibald, the late Joseph Archibald, in Baker's Corner, and yours truly, the youngest and smallest of the 3, got the 3rd one. Right? So, but Mr. Beach, I was in 6th standard. Normally he prepared the 7th standard. But he told my aunt, I want you to send this boy in. And so I went, and that was the result. Being able to go to grammar school at that time without a scholarship was, for us, for me, impossible. The cost was $16.80 a term, and we didn't have it. We couldn't afford it back then. Right? So that in a sense gave my start from him as Mr. Beach himself. He said, if you're going to work, you don't arrive. If you arrive on time, you're late. That was his.
Well, that's a good philosophy.
Huh?
That's a good philosophy, because things can happen that keep you back anyway.
He said, if you arrive on time, right on time, you're late. He said, you must get there ahead of time, right? And get your books, get whatever you have to do. Be prepared that when that place is opened, at the opening hour, you are ready to work. Even though that doesn't happen.
So I have to ask you, sir, in terms of these lessons that obviously informed who you are and the type of leader that you've become, when we look at legacies, what do you hope your legacy will be?
That's an interesting one. I never really thought seriously about it. I mean, I put everything I can remember here. And yes, one of the most important things to my mind was, obviously, now that I think more about it, independence. But prior to independence, the biggest thing was forging that link between St. Kitts and Nevis. I think it might be difficult for persons who weren't around and perhaps who didn't sort of specifically study period to recognize that in 1980, when we contested the election again, having lost in 66, 71, 75. 75 was almost a wipeout. We were devastated after 75. But in 78, Mr. Bradshaw died. He was followed by Mr. Southwell. And the friends, a window of opportunity opened. There was a by-election. And that gave an indication of what was happening. Things were turning a bit. So in 1980, when we got 3 seats here, and some Daniel NRP got all the seats in Nevis, the window of opportunity opened. At that time, Nevis was heading straight for secession. As a matter of fact, I don't know that people appreciate or recognize, and those I remember, that there had been a conference in London about independence under Mr. Moore's government. And I'm trying to use the exact words. It was agreed, subject to the necessary constitutional arrangements, that St. Kitts and Nevis should proceed to independence early in 1980. But 6 months, within 6 months, there must be a referendum for Nevis on the question of Nevis secession. The representatives of Nevis did not agree. It's all in here. Did not agree. Go back to what had happened with Anguilla, where the representatives of Anguilla and the people of Anguilla did not agree with going into statehood together with the rest of the state. So we have history repeating itself now, where Nevis did not agree. So therefore, the manifesto of the NRP at that time under Mr. Daniel was one sentence. It's the most economical manifesto in the history of politics, I think. It was literally a one-sentence manifesto to achieve secession for Nevis at all costs. And then you get up. I always used to go to sleep at election night, so I never hear the results until I got up in the morning.
That's interesting.
Right? I always did that. But a couple of my colleagues came and woke me up. Dr. Herbert, late Mr. Ivan Buchanan, came and woke me up. Said the boat was down there and ready. Colin Pereira had his boat, Barracuda. And so we rushed down and went across to Nevis, avoiding the noise and the jamming and that was going on down in Bastille. And we went and we sat down with Mr. Daniel and Mr. Stevens, etc., and the others of his team. And we thrashed out an arrangement to begin with. And I think there's no question they came into it because this was an opportunity to be part of the government and not just fighting against the government. And that was the difference. So being able to forge that link between and to, in essence, prevent the breakup of our state. It wasn't yet called the Federation, but to prevent the breakup at that point, right? And that was a stepping stone to be able to go into independence later. Because, you know, I wrote this book. It was very difficult. I tried writing and typing, don't type very well. And I'd get about 2 to 3 sentences. I couldn't get any further. But so eventually what I did was to talk. This is we sit here, set up the cameras. I've had a friend of mine who was very much into that. Yeah. And he helped me set up the cameras. And he'd sit in a corner. Sometimes I look and he'd be sleeping. But let's talk. And then we had it transcribed from the video.